When I received the call about my grandfather's passing, it hit me harder than I expected. We weren't particularly close, but he was one of those constants in life. A quiet presence at family gatherings, always sitting in his worn-out recliner, smiling softly as the chaos of children and conversation swirled around him. I drove to the funeral in silence, the hum of the car engine my only company. It wasn't a large gathering. My family was scattered, both physically and emotionally, and most of us hadn't seen each other in years. The service was simple, just as he would have wanted it. After the funeral, the lawyer announced that my grandfather's will would be read later that week. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't expecting anything. Why would I? My parents, uncles, and cousins had spent far more time with him than I had. If there was anything to inherit, it wouldn't be coming to me. But then came the day of the will reading, and everything changed. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses that seemed too large for his face, cleared his throat and began reading in that flat, practiced tone lawyers use. Most of the will was straightforward: small personal items, sentimental trinkets, and modest savings divided among various family members. And then he got to the last part. I hereby leave all my land, including the farmhouse and adjoining forest, to my grandson John. The room went silent. I froze, certain I'd misheard. My name? Why me? I barely had time to process the shock before the murmurs started. "Are you serious?" one of my cousins snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What the hell, John?" another cousin said, glaring at me like I'd somehow orchestrated the whole thing. Even my parents looked confused. My father furrowed his brow, and my mother avoided my gaze altogether, as if this decision somehow embarrassed her. The lawyer continued. "It was your grandfather's explicit wish. The documents are in order. There's no ambiguity here." The meeting ended in tension, with half the family shooting daggers at me and the other half too stunned to speak. I left the lawyer's office with the deed to the land and a million questions I couldn't answer. The following weekend, I drove out to the farmhouse for the first time in years. It looked just as I remembered, weathered and leaning slightly to one side, like an old man who refused to give up. The fields around it stretched endlessly, dotted with tall trees and wildflowers. At first, I tried to focus on the practicalities. I inspected the house, noting the repairs it would need. I walked the property, marveling at the sheer size of it. But no matter how hard I tried to focus on the present, one question kept nagging at me. Why did he leave this to me? I found the answer in the attic. The small, dusty space was filled with old boxes, their contents long forgotten. As I rummaged through them, I came across a wooden chest with a rusted latch. Inside were stacks of letters, photographs, and yellowed documents. The photographs caught my attention first. Most were black and white, showing my grandfather as a young man. In some, he stood beside an older man I didn't recognize, wearing simple clothes and a somber expression. The letters were more revealing. They told a story of betrayal, of promises made and broken. My great-great-grandfather, as it turned out, had been a laborer on this very land. He'd worked for the Bennets, a wealthy family who had owned the property for generations. According to the letters, the Bennets had promised him a portion of the land as payment for years of backbreaking work. But when the time came, they reneged on their promise, leaving him with nothing. The last letter, written by my grandfather, was addressed to me. "John, this land was never truly ours. It was taken from a man who deserved better, and I've carried that guilt my entire life. I'm leaving it to you because I believe you'll do what I couldn't. Make things right." The weight of those words settled on me like a stone. I couldn't ignore it. But what did making things right even mean? I spent the next few weeks piecing together the story. With some digging, I tracked down the descendants of the Bennets. Most had moved away, but one man, Daniel Bennett, still lived in the area. Daniel was in his 70s, with a slow, deliberate way of speaking. When I met him at a local cafe, he seemed wary but curious. I told him everything: the letters, the inheritance, the guilt my grandfather had carried. To my surprise, he didn't react with anger or denial. "I've heard bits of this story," he said, stirring his coffee. "My father used to talk about the farm, how it was the pride of our family. But he also said it came with a curse. Maybe that's why we lost everything." I nodded. "It's not a curse. It's a debt." Daniel looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "So what now?" The answer wasn't simple. I called a meeting at the farmhouse, inviting my family and the Bennetts. The tension in the room was palpable as I laid out the letters and explained my plan. Part of the land, including the farmhouse, would go to the Bennetts. The rest would remain in my name, but I intended to turn it into something that would benefit the community, a way to honor the laborer who had been wronged. Not everyone was happy. Some of my cousins accused me of giving away what was rightfully ours. Others argued that the past was the past, and digging it up would only cause more problems. But Daniel? He just nodded, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Today, the farmhouse stands as a symbol of reconciliation. Part of the land is owned by the Bennetts, and the rest has been transformed into a community farm. Local families come together to grow crops, share resources, and build something lasting. When I walk the fields, I feel my grandfather's presence. He left me the land to carry a burden he couldn't. And though the weight of the past is still there, it's lighter now. In the end, I didn't just inherit land. I inherited a story, and the responsibility to make sure it had a better ending.